like to call us back to order for the third time this evening.
Yeah, no kidding.
And the next item of business is
What?
public comment. I think we
Gee.
chased all the public away.
They ate their cookies and went home.
Next on is the UPDAC report.
Okay. Well, I mean, Melissa's right. It was a good meeting. We had a good, they had a good look around. They saw Brookins. It's a good discussion. It's a great group. I'm really happy with the group. And I had an interesting chat with our awardee tonight, whose name I can never remember. Ben, right, about the soccer program and the soccer field. So that's something that was my own personal takeaway from that meeting. Because sometimes I think the athletics aspect of recreation is kind of a stepchild sometimes, and I think that I think those guys are working out there kind of in anonymity in some ways, and I think that I see some of those shortages reflected in how things are going in athletics in Urbana High School. I think they're not doing all that well in a lot of sports, and I think that, I mean, obviously we're not going to, that's not our job, but I think that if we've got a lot of really good programs, that it will be more of a feeder program if we can, especially if we can expand it out into the into the whole community. So that was my takeaway from the meeting, but it was good, and this group continues to be good and to work well together.
One note that I might make, we had 2 UPDAC members go with us to Plainfield on Friday.
Oh, terrific. Oh,
yeah,
great.
Melissa went and Jean Paley went, and I rode in the van with them. That was really good. It was very good to get their input and see the tremendous interest that they had in going. So.
Yep, that is great. That is great. Yeah, Melissa's doing a really good job.
Any other questions or comments on the UPDAC? Hearing none, then let's move on to our consent agenda. And on the consent agenda this evening is approval of the minutes of the March 5th study session, the minutes of the March 12th regular board meeting, action to accept the philanthropy report and gifts listed with gratitude, receipt of the 3 departmental monthly reports, approval of the monthly paid accounts payable, action to receive post-issuance tax compliance report, and action to approve resolution 2019-01 to designate committed ending fund balances. And believe that is all on the consent agenda this evening. So it is the purview of any single commissioner to remove any of these items from the consent agenda for separate discussion and action. Is there any such request or desire on the part of the board? Hearing none, is there a motion that we approve the items on the consent agenda in an omnibus fashion?
Move to approve all action items on the consent agenda and accept all the information items listed on the consent agenda in an omnibus manner.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded, and under our consent agenda rules, there's to be no further discussion. So let's hold a roll call vote, starting at the left with LaShonda.
Aye.
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 And that carries unanimously. Moving on to the reports.
The first item that I'd like to discuss is that we received our GFOA Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting that Michael mentioned at the study session, and I brought our 10-year plaque with our newly minted 2018 sticker on it for y'all, and it's very heavy, so you'll get to feel the heft of the value of this award.
It's the weight of money.
The weight of the work that goes into it. And
Yeah, no kidding.
we're very proud that we've gotten this for 19 consecutive years. So not all of the years are represented on that plaque. That's just a plaque that can accumulate up to 10 years worth of awards. But we have received, this was our 19th year in a row.
Oh,
So,
oh geez, rocks. Oh, it's gonna be like a rock.
so thank you for everyone's diligence to making sure that our finances are in great condition every year and that they're watched by all the right people, and including the GFOA feels the same way. So
Awesome.
it's an
Isn't
exciting
it?
moment for me when I
Yeah.
get that. It's kind of the pinnacle of the work that I put into the audit. So very exciting.
One gold disc.
All right. So,
Did you want to do a photo?
oh, I don't know. Do we need a
Sure.
photo?
It's gotta
There
go
is a
on the
press
Facebook.
release that Mark has that he
Of
can
course,
send
I
out.
told you earlier, yes.
I know, we were trying to avoid it, Roland,
Let's
but.
have our
Oh,
board and
I don't need to be in a photo.
Yes, you do.
everybody get a photo. Just for one more second.
You're doing the
Think of
hard work.
Facebook and
Yeah.
website and all that good stuff.
With our press release.
Yes.
Wow.
Committee has to get up there.
Well, Tim,
No, no,
your
no.
name's on it.
Courtney, can you back this up here?
Oh, you're the one who did all the work.
You probably have a
Well,
better,
Tim too.
let's squeeze it together.
Just as a hanger on it.
We gotta get the worker boots up here.
But you guys look so good.
This way closer.
you're great.
2, 3. Okay. Corky.
Look, yeah.
Great.
Okay.
All right, well, congratulations. That's really
Yes,
it.
wonderful.
So it is a well-deserved honor.
I put it in the notes that we were taking. So.
What are friends for, Katie?
I tried to resist.
Oh my gosh.
In the notes there.
You're resisting the irresistible.
Okay, so we're 11 months into our fiscal year. We're getting right towards the end here. And now's a good time that we can really start projecting how the rest of this fiscal year is going to go. And so you can see on the front page of our revenue and expenditure report, which is our new fund balance report, that our total revenues and transfers in for this period were $11,632,000. And our total expenditures through this 11 months were $11,282,000. And we have a net excess of revenues over expenditures of $350,000 at the end of at the end of 11 months. And we had budgeted a deficit of $616,000. So we're about $900,000 plus ahead on that. So that's doing pretty well. Of course, we still have 1 month of spending to get through, 2 payrolls and all of our usual bills, and then we have payables. This page doesn't represent any payables that include capital improvements, which is where a lot of our payables are. So there aren't nearly as many payables in the operating funds, other than maybe some utilities and things that come in May and June. But the capital projects can take a little while to catch up because a lot of the vendors and contractors don't issue their invoices until the end of the month for the work that they completed in that month. And then that can take a month or so to get through the whole process. And so a lot of our payables will still come through on those large projects like the ITEP that's really getting started now.
I like the color.
Thanks.
Thank you for the highlights.
I like the highlight.
Thanks, yeah, that's new. Yeah.
Our old tired eyes are.
I continue to try to hone this report since we converted to the new system, although I didn't make a whole lot of changes since last month because I still liked the format a lot from the last time. And so I think I've narrowed in on this one being a good one. So that's where I'm at with this, unless people have further suggestions. So I'm happy to accept any other suggestions if there's other information you'd like to see. So on page 2, this is just the capital improvements fund. And for revenues, we've received $1,172,000, and total expenditures are $885,000. The revenues at the top include the bond sales and transfers in that were primarily for the pool pack, the $224,000 of transfers in. And then total revenues over expenditures were $287,000 at this point in the year. And I don't think we're going to get to the budgeted deficit, but again, our goal for this entire fund is to spend the whole fund. We issue the bond funds. There's an expectation that we spend bond funds within 3 years. And then any amount that isn't bond funds, it doesn't have restrictions like that on spending. So those amounts may linger longer for donations or grants, depending on the grant, the rules of that grant and what your timeline is for spending it. So you'll see in the prelim budget, if we go through a few of the key pages at the front of it, you'll see that we're budgeting to have quite a bit more of a deficit in capital for next year because we're entering into the large second phase of Crystal Lake, and then additionally the remaining portion of construction on the ITEP grant, et cetera. So we're budgeting to really spend out of that fund next year. And then finally, the all funds district-wide page on page 3. At this point in the fiscal year, the bottom line is that our ending fund balance right now is $7,748,000. And we'll continue to spend that down through this last month until we know where our final fund balances end. We started out the year at 7.1 million, so we're a little bit ahead of, we're certainly ahead of our projection, and we're definitely ahead of where we began the year. Following that are the same reports for the individual funds, the general fund, the recreation fund, the museum fund, and the indoor pool. Does anybody have any questions about those?
No.
Great. And I'll talk about the treasurer's report next. So the first page of the treasurer's report lists all of our 24 funds with where the money is invested for a grand total of $9,359,009.18.
You think I'd never done this before?
Page 2, the top section lists money that we have in interest-bearing accounts. And at the end of March, we had all of our CDs in our Busey investment account mature. So 2 years ago, we opened an account with Busey Investment Services so that we could broker some additional CDs with them. We also have CDs with Park Pool and with Commerce Bank. With Busey Bank, my idea there was to broker CDs with them for monies that we know we don't need in the coming year, but that we want to reevaluate each year to decide whether we want to reinvest. So I have all of those CDs mature at the end of March or beginning of April, so that then we can reassess with the beginning of the next year and then reinvest in May or June for the next 9 or 10 months. So those are all matured. The remaining $55.66 that's in there is just some lingering interest that accrued before they transferred it out. So it really is still in there. So they'll transfer that out before the end of April, and it'll get zeroed out at the end of the year. And other than that, I also worked in the Commerce CDs. Oh, sorry, not the Commerce CDs. The Park Pool CDs also matured in March, and I worked with Park Pool to reinvest them again. There's 4 one-year CDs in that account, and I worked with Park Pool to reinvest them all in March. The reinvestment didn't take place till April, though, so now it's finalized and they'll all be reinvested. And they had really great rates for CDs. It was a net rate of 2.6%. I'm not getting anywhere near that on the Commerce CDs. For a similar term was 2.35%. So I was really impressed with the rates, and they seem to have access to different banks than the Busey and Commerce brokers do. So it's a good variety, and I like working with all of the different banks and just spreading it out over all of those different brokers. So I'm glad that we have options that I can really analyze and pick from, because it'd be hard to just call up a random bank and ask what their going rate for a CD is, because they might be able to give us something competitive, but the process to open an account with them would be very lengthy. So it's good that we have 3 brokered CD accounts already open that we can pick and choose and reinvest where it's advantageous for the district. So we had total investments of $8,059,000. And we didn't have any changes to our interfund loans for this period. And finally, on the last page, you can see that our disbursements for the month of March were $699,000. And really the reason that that's kind of an outlier is because there were 3 payrolls in March. So otherwise it was just a basic month of the off season. And if there's no questions about the treasurer's report, I present it to you for approval.
I'll move we accept the the treasurer's report for audit.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously.
Lastly, I'm going to touch briefly on the areas that have had activity in the capital budgets this period. We received revenues for tributes in the 2019 capital budget, and we incurred expenses on the cost of issuance. We paid for the bulk of the Phillips playground, the purchase of the actual playground equipment. And then lastly, the two items that are under AP&C solar and AP&C interpretive exhibit. We're going to talk more about those when Andy talks about the revision to the capital budget, but the Nature Center had budgeted in their operating budget to make some of these major improvements. And I decided, kind of late in the game, I probably could have decided it along with their original budget, but I decided probably in the last month that I would rather, because of the dollar figure of those expenditures, that they actually be paid from the capital budget for record keeping, but we're going to fund them with a transfer in from the museum fund. So the museum fund's still paying for the improvement, but we're tracking the fixed assets because they're going to qualify for depreciation and stuff. So I just thought it's really easier to track them here. So Andy and I worked together to revise the budget to have them flow through this fund instead.
Did
So
we
that's
get
what-
excuse me, did we get any donations for the solar at APNC or not?
No donations,
I don't
but we
think
got
any
we got
outright
incentive money
donations.
through the state.
Okay, because okay.
I don't believe we solicited donations actively that I'm aware of.
And both of these projects are actually going to span FY 19 and 20. The total project amounts are here, the 29 and the 93 is
Yep.
the total of the projects, but only 20 of the solar project is going to be spent in FY 19, and the remaining 9 is going to be spent in FY 20. And then for the interpretation, we're only doing the design work in FY 19, and we're doing the construction portion in FY 20. And we don't know the total cost of that yet because we haven't entered to that phase. So that's just an estimate at this point until we know those costs. But so that's all the activity in 2019. In 2018, there was some minimal activity in the English fund transfer for the pool pack. We're, I believe, after yesterday's meeting, going to be closing that contract out at the end of this month. And there was, we also received the reimbursement from IDOT in the month of March for the easements that the board granted for the park, the
right.
Wheel Park pathway improvements that are coming along with that IDOT project. We spent money on tributes and pool pack, and then down towards the bottom there, we did something small at Weaver. I can't recall what the individual item was. It was
The
like,
sign?
yes, it was the sign, sorry. And finally, in the 2017 budget, we had spending on out of the ADA capital projects account, and that was for the James Room project. And recreation small equipment was also for the James Room for some of the
That was the water fountains
stuff we were outfitting.
Building.
Oh, okay, other improvements.
that we put in the project and then paid from rec, small equipment.
And then we also made payments on the ITEP grant project on the Park Street path in Crystal Lake Park. And there was no activity in the 2016 budget this month. And with that, Andy and Derek have some capital project updates.
I'll start with our ITEP project that is moving along at a very rapid pace. Stark is seeming to be very motivated to get this project done before their mandatory deadline of July 12th. The lake is down at this point, I believe around 6 feet, which is probably about as far as we're going to be able to drop it and as far as it's going to need to go for this portion of the project.
It's down by 6 or down to 6?
Down by.
Down
Down
by
by,
6
okay.
feet. So our average depth is usually around 10 feet.
So you can see the sun,
So
the sunny's fins, right, going through the water like sharks.
it's the lowest I think I've ever seen it,
Yeah.
for sure. So, and it needs to be lowered so that they can do some earthwork on the corner of Park and Broadway, and then on the bottom of the peninsula, basically below Cannonball Hill, they'll grade back that area and then fill at Park and Broadway. And they think that they can get the most of that work completed in the next week or two. Once that's done, they can have their landscape sub come in and do their seeding and plantings, and we'll be able to start inserting plates back into our lake level control structure and let rain start filling the lake up probably by the end of this month and beginning of May. With CLP Rehab, our phase 2, what we call our phase 2 rehabilitation project, it's focusing primarily on shoreline work, the rock outcroppings, public kayak launch, and then revising the makeup water treatment to naturalized pool. We received our 25% design. We convened our larger staff project group and went through all the design sheets and have sent our comments and questions to ERA. Our smaller project team will meet for a progress meeting next week, and then we'll be able to answer any other questions based on our comments and give any more feedback that we have for them to incorporate for our next phase, which would be the 60% design level that we would anticipate in the next month or so. Once we receive that, we'll go through our standard staff review and then be able to have a public meeting at that point to share where we're at with the design and what we're anticipating for the future project that would be bid this summer, and then anticipating construction in the fall into early winter. With Phillips, we have gained access of our James room and kitchen. Janet actually had a meeting there today, so it's being actively used at this point by our staff. There's still some punch list items that are going to get done in the next week or two by the contractor, but we're moving everything in and ready to go for programs in the future. Keith updated us at our project meeting yesterday on the playground. He still feels good about the schedule. I know he's working on the swing structure and the 2 to 5 play area, and still anticipates having everything up and ready for kids' activities by June. Real quickly on the outdoor pool, we have an improvements project for the lockers, the exterior lockers, the interior pocket lockers, and the 2 private changing spaces. That should be finishing up in the next week or two. This week they're going to focus on the flooring in those 2 new rooms, and then once that's done next week they can install the finishings, the benches, the signs, and touch up painting and everything, and we should be done in 2 weeks or so.
Sounds good.
Perkins Road Phase 3, this is an upcoming bid that we hope to have a recommendation to the board next month. Phase 1 and 2 covered restoration on the western portion of the park site. This will cover the eastern and southeastern portion, eastern side of the road, the maintenance road that's currently there, and it'll restore to marsh and prairie in both those zones. This has been something, as you are all aware, that the sanitary district has been providing installments each year to help pay in full for this project. Our design team's working on the bid documents this week, and we hope to have it out by the end of the week for you all to have an action on next month.
I'll just note on that we got an updated cost estimate from them last week. We'd actually hoped to put it to bid on Friday, but it increased by a fair amount. The earthwork in particular went up quite a bit, and so we've been working with them on rescoping the project and building in some bid alternates. The one that seems like it might save us the most is to take the area that's south of the lagoon, which is our stockpile area, rather than putting that, restoring it completely after it's done being used as a stockpile area, seed it in a cover crop like oats, and then talking with a group like Pheasants Forever about coming back and doing a seeding project there in the future. And we think that could help quite a bit. We also are going to be able to award future years of maintenance out of future budgets, and that would help as well. So we're expecting an updated cost estimate, and hopefully we can move forward with bidding. And talking with Rick Manor at the Sanitary District, it's clear they're really committed to this project and eager to wrap it up. They're excited about celebrating the completion of the restoration there, and they're looking at ways they might be able to allocate some additional funding beyond which was currently anticipated for the next fiscal year.
Great.
We really thank their support and participation in this project. It's going to be a dynamite site.
Oh, yeah.
Last thing I wanted to mention is with Leal Park and our recent development to the east of the Culver's site, we've lost a number of staff spaces, and we're going to be working with BCA here shortly to work on expanding our current parking lot, that paved parking lot in the northwest portion. We're currently leasing parking spaces in the gravel lot south of the park in order to allow us, we think we need around 20 total spaces for our staff, interns, park visitors, and anybody that needs to come to the site to conduct business in our administration office. So we're going to be looking at going to bid to expand that parking by about 10 or 12 total spaces, and then provide some screening on that eastern side from our admin office to the new restaurant.
You mentioned that this kind of came to us in a hurry. We've been asking for a set of the plans for some time. Once the contractor was on site, we were able to meet with them and get a copy of the plans. And no surprise, you've seen what's taking place. The impact is going to be considerable. A lot of the trees on the site have been removed. There's going to be lighting, obviously parking, and potentially a dumpster quite close to the Leal Cottage facility. They had tried to save more trees, but they were challenged. They're trying to squeeze every parking spot they can out of it. It does appear that the one big tree behind the Blue House will be preserved at this point, although they're still in discussions with Culver's corporate as to whether their current site plan will be given the green light. So it's been a challenge. There's also been a challenge with utilities. Currently, electrical and telephone are serviced through the Culver's acquisition property, and the utilities have been scrambling to figure out how best to service the cottage. It appears that Ameren is going to come in adjacent to their gas line, so off of University Avenue South along our east property line. It's a pretty busy area already. We've got gas in there currently, and also our fiber, I3, formerly UC2B, comes through there. In talking with AT&T, they think they're going to use that same area. That is the same area where we hope to put in some screening. And so we thought it was critical to get BCA involved in that, and so we can do some very precise surveying and make sure we're putting things where we have room and won't sever a utility. So this is currently an unbudgeted project, and per kind of our purchasing policy, anything that's over $10,000 for a contract requires the approval of Tim and Michael, and then notifying the board in the future. We think because of how quickly this is coming and the fact that we appear to have some operating revenue to work with in the current fiscal year, we'd recommend that we move forward with design currently for a fee not to exceed $10,000, and then come back to you all once we have a better idea of what the costs will be and the design would be, and to recommend moving forward with bid and ultimately some construction observation by BCA. So it's coming quick, but we think we've got some good ideas. In meeting with BCA on site, they were thinking about ways we could reconfigure the parking so it wouldn't occupy as much of the north side of Leal Park, and we're eager to get them on contract and begin meeting with cottage staff to better plan for what's needed. Tim had mentioned in the past there was the potential we might be able to work with the hotel owner to the west on a shared parking approach. It appears like anything there is not going to move forward. They needed a lot more space than is available. So the idea of continuing to lease parking long term from Silver Creek is one that's difficult to stomach, and we know this is a condition we're going to have for the long term. So this is the time to take care of it. Tim, was there anything you wanted to add?
Just, I think would have been nice to have more cooperative planning on the site. For example, even if we could have just coordinated the utilities in a shared area instead of not being able to use where they came through their site. I mean, typically you would hope that you could at least get a right-of-way for that sort of thing. Because we couldn't or wasn't allowed, we're forced to take alternative routes, so that makes things more challenging and probably harder for the utilities. So, but our goal is to still restore the site, make it work, and still make it a, destination, because it is a critical linkage from downtown. We see a lot of people
Yep.
using the through path, and our longer term vision is to create these linkages through downtown all the way to Crystal Lake Park, so people have options, of route, variety, where they could stop, and, just really utilizing all of our parks. So I think we'll get there eventually, but we're playing catch up at this point, so.
What about lighting in that south path? I mean, when staff is leaving, like early fall and it gets dark.
Talked about that. It's an odd site. Years and years before I came to the district, there were 2 light poles that were placed, relatively near the cottage area, but we've changed so much there. And so I think what staff agreed is lighting needs to be looked at, but with our current cost, kind of take it in steps, maybe deal with the parking and access, and then connectivity, and then screening, and then lighting. So it may be spread out over a few years.
Yeah, we're trying to prioritize what's most critical at this point. Because this is an unbudgeted expense, it's essentially pulling from our Crystal Lake project. And already we don't have funds to complete, all of what we have planned for in the lake rehab. I don't think that's a problem. In fact, I think it's an advantage in some respects, because we want to phase that lake project in over time, so there's not complete loss of cover along the lake edge. But the money is tight, and so I think Tim identified some of the priorities. Parking and connectivity, screening, securing the pavilion. For the lighting, I think what we're currently planning is running conduit up to where we could extend it in the future, but not pulling that trigger yet.
Appreciate you asking, though, because we do have a couple of staff that are concerned. The front lot currently is lit, and the gazebo and that route to the front door. But parking people in the back for a long-term period, I think they're already uncomfortable, because, early mornings or wintertime, light conditions. So all of it is remedied, but as Derek said, it will cost, and we're just trying to break it down into phases and kind of restore it as we go. But certainly safety and those basic things are important.
Are we gonna suffer expenses for the rerouting of the utilities? I mean, we have to pay for that, or is that up to the
My
utilities?
expectation is the utility is covering all those costs.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've, at least the power company has talked about, I'm not sure what they're still saying. I was involved early. I think Derek's working it now. But they were willing to, bore lines so they wouldn't disrupt. Trenching tree roots is not a good thing if you can avoid it. So if you can go under it, that's at least a little more friendly.
Electric's planning on boring. Ameren hasn't determined even the route. I'm sorry, not Ameren. AT&T hasn't determined the route they're going to take yet.
So we hope so, because there are a number of trees in the area, and it
Missed
way
a
to
few.
do it from our perspective.
So is this tree that we're contemplating the one that was mentioned, that was being saved when we were commenting that all the other trees were going down?
This one is not the large oak trees that were on the front of the property along University.
Right.
Those have been taken down.
But
those
there was
two.
like one
There's one near
concession
the-
tree.
Correct.
This
Yeah.
is it
Still
now
on the
that they're
side.
even reevaluating?
Our impression is that
curious.
the owner and the contractor want to save it, but corporate's questioning some of the configuration
Gotcha.
of the space around there. We haven't got a clear response yet.
And they've also so far left the small redbud trees that are along kind of the area we used to walk through from the parking
Yeah, I
lot.
think there's 3 left.
But we don't know if those are going away yet. They
Right.
so far have left those.
Well, and then also the damage that happens in a construction site. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
to trees, they could leave, will eventually fail.
Right. I mean, there's some grading up toward University that, it's not recommended to disturb those areas out beyond the, drip line.
Yeah.
Some people believe in twice that distance, but depending on the tree and location, age, but.
Okay.
So we're, trying to be workable and supportive of development, and we'll have some things we'll have to follow up with.
I guess I'd also mention, I know there was some discussion at the study session last week about the work in Crystal Lake, and we're working with marketing now. I think they've got a press release as a follow-up about what's happening with the PATH project, working towards having a website that's devoted to all things Crystal Lake in terms of the sequencing of various projects, a banner that would go out that's akin to what we had at Hickman, And then more temporary signs, just notifying the public about what's going on.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciated your coming along on the bird walk on Sunday and interpreting that to the Audubon group, because they have a great deal of concern about what's going to happen there.
Certainly,
So
yeah.
I appreciated your presence.
Thank you. I realized as I went on, it was a lot to digest, and further underscores the importance of having, public information where people can go and read it and digest it more slowly. I wound up talking to Carol Augsburger quite a bit afterwards about what exactly we're doing, and in the end, I think she's actually enthusiastic, but she's certainly a concerned citizen.
Well, and I think the renderings are just, they're really
Excellent.
exciting and they look great. So if you can see what's to come, there's,
Yeah,
that's exciting.
absolutely.
Transition is often difficult.
Right.
Yes.
Something we talked about that
Changes.
we'd be willing to do is, if there was an interest in, sort of a neighborhood walk or a project up close.
Oh, yeah.
People want to sign up or get the word
Yeah.
up, just show up and, walk the perimeter and get at least a little more information. I think those things are always good to at least offer. If nobody says yes to it, that's okay, but at least you offered
At
it.
least you've done it. Well, didn't we have some walks through all the
Yeah, I
changes at
think
the south
they
end of
did
Meadowbrook?
Meadowbrook.
Yeah,
also,
yeah, yeah.
There are ways, again, people still may have a concern, but at least they have a conduit to express it or get more information.
right, yep, yep.
Goal wouldn't be to convince them it's, the way they would do it, but at least why we're doing it.
Well, thank you. And move on to the executive director's report.
Sure. Well, just leaving that topic, starting just thanks to planning and operations and recreation staff for working together. The three major projects at Crystal Lake are going to probably tax everybody's normal patience because there's changes. We just mentioned change everywhere from patrons to programs to, basic things like boating on the lake. Obviously, when you drop the lake water, to accommodate, it's going to disrupt something. So we've kind of worked through I think staff's used to it of working through projects and because we do know what that vision is on the other side, but for some of our regular visitors, it's, it's harder. So I appreciate all their efforts to provide information and work with everyone on rentals and, anything that's concerning to them. A couple of updates. Real pleased with staff looking at a number of therapeutic recreation programming options, including horticultural options that planning and operations is thinking of ahead, and also outreach and environmental education with some of the outdoor things that they've got in mind. So it's kind of a new opportunity and a new direction, so excited about that. A little update on Mare and Foal sculpture. As you know, we took the piece that used to be at the Phillips Rec Center away. It was put out at the free storage site. We've had our conservator, who's world renowned, who also helped us with the Laredo Taft sculpture at Carl Park, come and took he's looked at it before years ago, and we opted not to do anything at that time. But looking at what it would take to restore it, I think our concerns are: is it worth conserving? Is it too far gone? What would that cost be? What would it look like afterwards? And then probably a little more concerning, it's probably a good recommendation that we try to find an indoor location. It's something that should have ideally been placed indoor and kept indoor where it originally was, which was inside Lincoln Square. So we're doing a little bit of reach out to see, if it were available in the future, would anybody consider hosting it, or perhaps a transfer to another group that could house it. So we're just having a few discussions, but have not had the proposal returned to us on cost and technique. Obviously, indoor space is probably a premium for a lot of people, and coming up with the location, but we thought that would at least be part of the process.
Jim had mentioned that we also had him look at Lincoln the Lawyer while he's in town, and he was impressed by how it's holding up. We are going to schedule another visit for him yet this fiscal year in the next couple weeks to do another maintenance visit, essentially a hot wax treatment. But we're really appreciative of the gift that we got a few years back to better care for that piece for perpetuity.
There was an email about some graffiti in Carl
Yes.
Park.
Yep, it's been cleaned off. We think it happened either Sunday evening or early Monday, probably more likely Sunday late in the day. I went to look at the security camera footage, and some sort of glitch in the system. I'm having trouble accessing the footage right now.
Oh, is that the forces?
One of the things we're looking at right now with either our liability fund dollars or our technology is an update to all of our security cameras in the district.
yeah.
The system there, it's reliant upon a Wi-Fi signal at the pavilion, the public Wi-Fi for AT&T, and it could be improved. We know the camera quality has improved quite a bit. We have 3 different systems. Each requires accessing the IT closet, or in this case, the old restroom at the Carl Pavilion, to retrieve footage. If it were a modern system, we could check it on a weekly basis,
Right,
just by
right.
logging on, and with the better cameras,
your
I think we'd
dog.
have. What's that?
You can watch your dog these days.
Yeah, right.
So,
So we're.
from your phone, so yeah, I can see how we can maybe
Derek's new job is just looking at his phone, checking the park.
You shouldn't have to physically go there to pull the tape.
Right.
Yeah.
Technology has improved.
Yeah.
I guess the good news, we had lots of that type of activity on the indoor, of the pavilion, and haven't had much.
Well, this has been the
since we-
first in a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like
We
knocking
talked
on
about
wood, but
outdoor could be a site, but hopefully the cameras would be a deterrent, but that may be a reason to, consider upgrades, so that if we could identify these people, that would be the next best thing. So, kind of swings both ways. But,
yeah.
continuing, so again, Marin Full, we hope to see what that future will hold for that. I think last month there was a question in the public session about our, particularly our garden program at Redbud Park. So
Yep.
Staff's working together. We want to visit other garden programs, talk with other managers, find out, just basically what others are doing, how are they managing some of these challenges. I don't think, again, the issues presented aren't necessarily new to public gardening, but we want people to have a good experience, and so we want to see what we can do there. So we're still working on that. We'll come back with some information. Had a terrific meeting Friday, March 29th, over at the Wheelhouse in St. Joseph with the Trail Town program. As you know, the Park District and Forest Preserve and others help support, bring Amy Camp, a nationally known speaker on trail towns. It was wonderful. We had a fantastic updates by all the groups, presentations, and then certainly Amy was the keynote speaker and talked a lot about, trail towns in general, and then geared it toward what we could expect locally, and it's very exciting. I think one thing she kind of summarized and pointed out that encouraged us to do is think about the programming side, that we're probably ready for that, to get people out and get the word out. And by getting the word out, I mean in the fact that there's activities or events or just getting more people encouraged to use that great amenity. So it was an excellent meeting and well worth that. Also wanted to mention, had a great follow-up meeting with the School for Designing a Society. We're very energized at all the collaborative efforts we can do in arts programming. We're really looking at kind of that edge of Crystal Lake Park, that Broadway corridor, in a new light of how many different fun, cultural, artistic things can we string along that corridor, all the way from the north end at Crystal Lake Park at Country Club Road, all the way down to the Independent Media Center. And, what kind of improvements, what can we do in the park, what are the other facility opportunities? So I think there's a lot to work on, so we're very energized about that. Roger mentioned earlier, Friday we took a visit over to the Plainfield Park District to look at their health and wellness facility. Wonderful facility. I think there were things we thought we would probably do different, and things on the programming side as well as the construction and development, but wonderful facility. They have a great indoor-outdoor relationship with their site, and their adjacent park really works well.
What was one big positive thing you saw and one big negative thing you saw?
Obviously the energy source, dealing with solar and getting, it's a story to tell that probably helps reduce their bottom line and operating cost, and, it's just really kind of cutting edge. I think the building, each of us would have things we would point out. I think, the building materials and the architectural style was very impressive and had a, really strong street appearance and appeal.
Oh, it
a lot
did.
of the, what I'd call green practices with, managing water and collecting water, and looked like native landscape, being applied.
Yeah.
It was just planted, so you couldn't really see what was all coming up, and they had more site work to do. interior spaces, you know, they had the desirable combination of gym, raised track. I think we all felt their fitness exercise area, you know, the machine portion was really nicely done and, you know, well apportioned. They made other choices, like they had actual couple of large spaces dedicated to preschool, where they actually ran a preschool, which seemed odd to us, and it wasn't really childcare provided. It was actually a school that was, you know, a morning or half day, you know, programs.
Yeah.
So wasn't really sure what that was about. There wasn't a lot of staff offices or other meeting or fitness spaces. So I think if we were looking at things here, trading out, assuming that kindergarten options or pre-kindergarten is provided in the
Yeah,
private sector, maybe more fitness space, exercise rooms, you know, large studios where we saw at other places that the minute they had them, they filled them up with, you know, programs. I think their budget was around $7 million, obviously, and we've seen this in nature centers and communities. There seems to be a formula that goes with the price margin. You know, what do you get for this much, and what do you get at that? So obviously, if you go up, you can start adding those amenities. So it is hard making the choices, you know, to stay within a reasonable budget. I think it didn't look like their memberships numbers were up, although they'd only been open for a few months. I think January 1st. Was their first date, and then they had some construction issues on the second floor, so they couldn't open that part of the building until a few weeks later. But it still seemed like a low number compared to what we would expect. Other things I missed, anything observation-wise?
They actually had
Remarkable.
fantastic storage. It's one of those things that you don't always.
Yeah, they did
Oh,
have good
that's
storage.
good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's
And it was
super
well
important.
organized.
Yeah.
And the flooring, since that's always a big interest to us.
Flooring was good. Yeah, I thought they had a polished concrete in the main hall, nice tile in the bathroom, locker room area. They chose to go with wood in the
On the gym floors?
floor, but they elected not to protect it, which was, I think what we see is that, you know, you've got a program, and then you get into construction, and things start to get tight.
Yeah, and you have to cut
Certainly, they
someplace.
devoted a lot, you know, to making it a green facility. So, but by and large, I think it was a very positive visit. I think the staff there were still kind of getting through that aftershock of a very difficult project, and still sorting out a few things. But I really appreciate them taking the time to tour us through the site. And we were joined by, as Roger mentioned, 2 UPDAC members. Roger was there. Mike Royce also joined us as a representative from MTD, and had some really good dialogue with him on the way up and the way back. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously we do some different things in the building. The space itself could be utilized in a way that would work best for us versus how they were using. I mean, they
Sure.
have 4 rooms for preschool.
Do they have community space? You know, sort of a community rental
They had a
space?
community room, like a board meeting room.
Maybe about
This kind of size? Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the membership and things like that, I think a lot of that's due to the nature of the park district. Until this health and wellness center, they weren't the main providers of
Sure.
recreation in that community.
Right.
So, I mean, that goes into play on how well the facility was being utilized. And I think the pre-K rooms goes to show that they are not the leading providers in Plainfield for recreation. But I thought the facility as a whole had a lot of good things, but there was a few things that definitely may not meet our needs. But, you know, just like when we built the pool, I mean, you go by and look at all these centers,
right.
and you've picked things that are good, and you pick the things that,
Yep.
Yeah.
you know, people have learned from, and that's how we end up making that fabulous facility. So, fitness space was superb. I mean, I think that was probably, looking at what is on our mind of what kind of space you would need, that was almost exact, size-wise. It wasn't too huge, but it wasn't too small. It wasn't Savoy, and it wasn't the YMCA. It was kind of in between.
Yep.
The walking track was really well lit, lots of
Yes.
windows along it, and
Oh,
it
yeah,
looked
that's
out
what I asked
over
about.
an
Windows,
area that will eventually be kind of a native detention basin, so it'd be a very attractive thing to look out on as you walk around.
It's challenging to do that too, because many places we looked at before used their roof for skylighting, so that was an
Right.
easy way to bring. There's also other concerns with leaking and things like that, but they had panels on their roof, so they couldn't do that, and so they tried to utilize a series of, smaller windows and larger where they could, but it was fairly bright and felt good inside. So yeah, overall, it was a really good example. I think
Great.
something I want to know more about is, when you move in that net zero direction, what's all entailed with the mechanics? Because there's a lot of high-tech mechanical things, and it seemed like they were struggling with that. And just looking at how we've struggled with our pool pack,
Yeah.
makes me just definitely want to get more information about how that all works.
It
And,
was exactly like that, because really it wasn't working yet,
yeah,
right? I mean, they
Right.
couldn't tell what, I
Right.
mean, it may be working, but they couldn't adjust or
right. They were learning.
fine tune because they weren't the two computer systems weren't speaking to each other to
Oh,
make that happen
dear.
yet. So,
Right.
6 months down the road, they're still not up and going with that.
Right.
So it's
Um,
challenging.
It is. Yet, at the same time, you're encouraged and kind of need to move forward with technologies, because if can you just punch a window open, that's probably not the best efficient way to operate either. But yeah, overall, as was mentioned, I think the size, scale, budget, what it offered, and how they treated the site was very positive.
Good.
They did a good job. Wrapping up, just wanted to brag a little. We had a wonderful Boneyard Arts Festival in Urbana, throughout the county as well. I was really pleased the Park District had 3 venues. There was one at the Nature Center, one at the Phillips Center, and one at Meadowbrook Park. And just really great to see us grow like that. And so many people engaged. Of course, it was a perfect weather day, and that always helps get a lot of people out. I think all 3 Park District sites were well attended, so we're happy to be a part of that. I believe, and then just did want to mention a few program mentions. There was a great program we hosted at the Nature Center last week. It was called Men, Boys, Violence, and Trauma. It's a trauma training that was offered through the community. We just hosted it. We didn't, lead it. But there were over 30 attendees that came to that. And it's a really critical topic to focus on nonviolence and, really just talking and listening. I was intended to go for our Rotary group, but I had to leave town. But I heard it was terrific, and if
It's a
there's
space station.
future events, I'd love to go. If there's any other questions, I can answer them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Moving on to President's Report, upcoming meetings. There's April 30, May 1, Parks Day at the Capitol and Legislative Conference. I don't know if any of the other board members are planning to go. I will not be able to attend that particular one.
I'm still contemplating it.
Yeah, great. Study session May 7th, which is scheduled to be along with the Urbana Parks Foundation in a joint meeting. And May 14th is our annual board meeting, and then our regular board meeting. So that's all the annual appointments and election of officers and so on at that point.
Could I suggest a topic for the agenda for the joint meeting would be a discussion of the dinner?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments? Moving on to liaison reports. Finance Study Group did meet last Friday and discussed a number of things you've heard, the challenges in Leo Park, and also a bit on the budget things. So I'm not sure there's anything there that we went over that hasn't been dealt in some way in today's meeting now. And our next meeting is going to be on the 10th of May. The policy study group, is there anything to report there?
No, we are meeting May 7th before the study session.
And the Parks Foundation representative, Roger?
Just emphasizing the barn bash, and if you are on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, promote that and promote links to that. I think we're in good shape at this point in terms of filling that space, but there's a lot of work to do yet. Also, I broached the topic of diversity with the foundation to talk in terms of the membership, the outreach, and the levels of giving. And Ellen had invited me, Tim and me, to the Association of Fundraising Professionals that's going to be talking about circles of giving and talking about how to bring people in at maybe not at 5 or 6 figure levels, but at lower levels. So I think there was receptivity to that. We had a good conversation, particularly after the meeting. So.
And is there anything from the UPDEC planning study group?
Yeah, we have a meeting scheduled for Wednesday, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
Tomorrow.
Okay. So moving on to old business, we have action to approve revisions to the capital budgets for calendar year 2019.
This month of April board meeting, we usually do our capital budget revisions. For this month, we just have revision number 2 for 2019 capital budget. And I'll go through the highlighted portions that were attached to the memo in the board packet. Starting with our revenue section, we've included an $8,000 donation from the foundation, and that's for the Showmobile sound system and our graphics package. That's for the wrap that goes around the exterior of the Showmobile itself. I will note we are expecting delivery of the Showmobile in the 1st or 2nd week of May. The other funds that will then pay for the Showmobile are $50,000. That's already included in the equipment section from bond funds from this year's capital budget. And then the next line in revenue is the recreation fund transfer, $50,000, paying for the remaining portion of the stage. Katie had mentioned the transfer from the museum fund. It's in the amount of $122,000. That's for solar panel phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1's actually completed last week. Phase 2 we hope to have completed within the next fiscal year. And then the new, it's an interactive, interpretive design that's taking place of the current Take a Walk exhibit in the exhibit room there at the Nature Center. It's, as Katie mentioned, currently in design, but it'll walk participant through an interactive display where they can have a touch screen learning about our natural areas all throughout the park district, the amenities within each park, the history of the park, just a ton of information currently getting built up that will be programmed into this new display piece.
Side note, when Andy said touchscreen, I kind of smiled because the one piece we're replacing, that exhibit, I think its original configuration came with a hard cassette that slid into the TV with the little slot. So we're upgrading from there. And it is the one, there's other exhibits, but it's one that's geared more for adults. So if you're there with your kids, you can have a better experience. Sorry, Andy, for interrupting with that.
The last item in the revenue section is $7,000 from a letter of agreement that was signed with IDNR. This is for that saline rock riffle, bank stabilization, habitat enhancement project. So that $7,000 that we received will, again, we're serving as the procuring agent for IDNR. So this will get us through updating the design, through bid, and then for our engineer to provide a recommendation of award. Once we're prepared for the recommendation of award and we can bring it to the board, we'll have an IGA as well. That would then be a fund transfer from IDNR that would pay for the construction observation from that engineer, as well as all the construction activities that would be involved by the low bidder.
I guess I just might side comment that Andy and I decided to put only the $7,000 budget in for now until the construction budget's known, and then we'll revise again to add that. So we didn't want to project ahead when we really don't know, and we just thought we're just shoring up for the end of the fiscal year at this point, and we can always come back when we have more firm ideas and agreements in place.
Yep. And you'll see those revenues offset in the improvement to park expenditure section, and then the equipment section for the showmobile. And then I wanted to point out that at the very last highlighted line there is a $75,000 that we're setting aside as the general contingency for the overall capital improvement projects. And then just above that, there's a Crystal Lake improvement section. So the remaining funds that are available within this capital year are now being set aside in that amount of $280,365 that would then be set for our Crystal Lake Phase 2 rehab project. And we have no other years to update at this time. So unless there are any questions, that's all I have.
I move to approve revision number 2 to the 2019 capital budget.
Second.
Well, okay, that's been moved and seconded and probably thirded. Is there any further discussion? We should do a roll call vote on that. We'll start at the right.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
and that carries unanimously. There was no old business removed from the consent agenda, so we're on to new business. Action on ordinance 2019-03, revising the combined budget and appropriation ordinance.
This is a routine action that we basically have to do at the end of each fiscal year. There's really nothing abnormal in this. It's mostly just evening up the transfers from what we originally budgeted to what the actual transfers between funds are. So you can see, for example, number 2 on the list, the transfer from the general fund to capital improvements. That was to fund the purchase of the Grossbach house and demolition. So that was something, these are all things the board kind of approved along the way, and then we revise at the end. Number 3 is the transfer from the recreation fund to the Crystal Lake replacement and renewal fund for the pool. And we reduced that transfer because we're making $50,000 worth of improvements out of the R&R fund, but the improvement total cost was more than $50,000. We're going to pay those additional improvements directly out of the rec fund where there are appropriations for those improvements, and then we are reducing our standard transfer amount by the amount of that overage. So that was also something we discussed along the way when we approved those improvements. The transfer from the museum fund is, again, it's for that first half of those improvements for the solar and interpretive exhibit. The second half will be appropriated in the FY20 budget. And then transfers from scholarship to rec and then transfers from scholarship to museum are number 5. Those transfers were reduced to actual funds available for transfer. So the total amount that we received in scholarship fund donations this year was $6,870. And so we reduced those, and we allocate those based on where scholarships were used. So we actually run reports of all of our scholarships, take the total dollar amounts, divided by the total distributed, get a percentage, and then apply that percentage to what we actually have to distribute and allocate it out percentage-wise. But of course, the need and application and use of scholarships is much higher than $6,870. But we're working on that for next year, I think, with the things Corky's doing.
Can I make one comment on
Please.
that? Because it came up in the finance study group the other day. So whenever we're budgeting for $17,000 in scholarship, raised scholarship dollars, and we end up at 6,800. What that means is tax dollars are paying for that scholarship. So I just want to be clear with everybody on the board that that's how that's being taken care of.
Moving to number 8, we increased the transfer from the English fund into the indoor pools budget because the earnings that the English fund received, in our agreement, we transfer 50% of our earnings into the indoor pool and 50% remain in the fund and continue to grow. So the original projections for the earnings was $3,500, which is what I budgeted, and then it wound up being $7,580, so that was good. And then all of the next 3 items are related to benefits that we pay for the indoor pool, and then number 10 is the portion of the intergovernmental agreement that we pay for the indoor pool. Number 11, we increased expenditures out of the Robin Hall Sculpture Fund. We had originally appropriated to spend the whole fund. Well, we received additional donations in the fund that then we turned around and purchased a sculpture with. So I had to increase the appropriations to cover that purchase. So it was a completely normal, regular part of business, because the law also says if you receive additional donations, you're automatically basically granted the appropriations, but you still have to have the board formally approve that revision. So that's the usual business tonight.
Well, I move to adopt ordinance 2019-03, revising the combined budget and appropriation ordinance.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we need to do a roll call, and we'll start at the left with LaShonda.
Aye.
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 And that carries unanimously with all 5 commissioners voting. So we're on now to action to approve resolution 2019-02, annual compensation actions.
Is there any staff input, any information needed at this point? I think we covered everything we had.
Yep.
So we have to do a pink something, whatever that is. Go ahead.
I move to approve resolution 2019-02, approving fiscal year 2019-220 or 2020 annual compensation actions with a market increase of 1.25%.
Second.
That's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion or questions on this one? Hearing none, again, we should do a roll call vote. This time we'll start at the right.
Aye.
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 And that, again, carries unanimously with all 5 commissioners voting. And lastly, not an action item, but receive the preliminary budget, which was on the table tonight.
I'll make a couple brief comments. I don't want to spend too much time. We typically, at the June board meeting, regular board meeting, will go through a presentation of the highlights of major changes. And by that point, a lot more of the budget is solidified of some of these unknowns that we aren't aware of at this point. But it is important to us that the commissioners do have some first take on, I mean, this is the last meeting before we officially start our next fiscal year. So we want the commissioners to know that at least our preliminary planning looks like we're in stable condition. Everything is budgeted, and we're ready to move it forward to May 1st. So if you do want to open it up, I just thought I'd go over just the first couple of pages really quickly, the highlights. And these are reports you're already used to looking at because they're very similar to the revenue and expenditure reports that you usually see. The first page, page 1 of the document, is exactly like sum 1, like you normally would see, which is all of the funds except for capital improvements. And I thought I would point out that the net deficit currently budgeted is $675,000. But as we work through this, it'll make sense to you why that is. And you can see last year's net deficit was 755. So it makes sense as you work through, because remember, these are appropriations, and a lot of times we're appropriating an entire fund, like for example, the Robin Hall Sculpture Fund, where it's a very small fund, but you don't know if you have commitments to spend it or not. So you have to appropriate it or you're not allowed to. And then the other deficits also, as I just go briefly through these couple pages, are known planned deficits. So you'll see that. On page 2, the capital improvements fund, I mentioned during my regular report that we were going to be budgeting a large deficit in this fund this year. So I'm sorry, I should have said that we're looking at the far right column. The column all the way on the right is our prelim budget for 2020. But you can see the bottom line, red line there, is the net deficit of $1.9 million. And that's because of these large projects that we're going into. So I don't know for sure. I just have a placeholder of $2 million of spending. And you can see if we really do spend all that, it'll leave $208,000 remaining fund balance in the fund. So that'd be great, because the goal is to spend it all, right, in 3 years or so. So we're gearing up to do that. And then this last page, or sum 3, excuse me, is just those first 2 pages added together. So you can see that net deficit's quite large because it's adding that 2 million capital plus the deficit of the operating budgets. But I did just want to touch really briefly on the first 4 funds, or 3 funds really. The general fund is on page 4. And again, the property tax placeholder that I have in here was from our preliminary levy that we worked on in September and October. I'm hoping I estimated it fairly conservatively and that it'll maybe come in a little higher than we expect. Right now, there's a 5% placeholder in for salaries that after the board's decision tonight, I can finalize and get some realistic numbers going in here. And there's a deficit of $211,000 in the general fund budget after that. But the majority of that, $192,000, is a transfer to the land acquisition fund to buy the 2 Main Street properties. So they're really just a one-time hit to this budget that's purchasing and demolishing those properties. So that was expected, so I don't feel uncomfortable about that deficit. The recreation fund on page 5, it also has a deficit of $72,900, but again, that's a $50,000 transfer to purchase the showmobile. And there was something else that it is. No, I can't remember.
We also have a donation we're working with. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So anyway, most of it is the showmobile anyway, the 50,000 of it. And we'll talk more about highlights and all of that, but all of these things are adding up to that 600 sum on that first page. That's what these main things are. And then lastly, the museum fund, just like we talked about tonight, 160,000. Well, 122 of that is going into the capital projects fund for these major improvements. So it's all really pretty.
Lighting upgrades.
Lighting upgrades.
Is a one time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then I also should point out, and I will bring more information to the board at a future meeting, that the museum fund and the general fund are above their maximum fund balance targets at this point. So it's a good decision for the board to allocate those dollars out. So I just don't want anybody thinking that this is an uncomfortable number. So I think everybody should feel good about this prelim budget. And as we continue to finalize it, we'll bring more information to the board.
Great job.
That's it.
No action required there, so, and nor was any new business removed from the consent agenda, so we're down to comments from commissioners.
I have 2. One is, it was nice to have the community service awards today, and I feel like we've talked about this in the past, and I mentioned this to Roger. I think it would be great if we could somehow include this in the annual dinner with the UPF. Mm-hmm. You know, something where one part of what we do is comp them the meal tickets, but I recognize that the foundation showcases a lot of the donors, but these folks have donated their time and effort and are passionate about the park district. So I think that would be another agenda item. It would also, encourage a few different folks maybe to attend. So, The other thing is, did you see the letter to the editor about the signs in Meadowbrook Park?
Yes, yes.
Quite sure I was commenting a few times, we've changed it twice since we established it. So we need a little more information. It's not jumping right out to us.
And you hadn't heard from this person?
No, I wasn't.
But they're eager to
I
help.
don't know that.
Yeah, they are eager to help. They're eager
They're
to help.
eager-
I
yeah.
appreciate that, and that's
Yeah.
wonderful. I think one of the challenges we noticed right off the bat at Meadowbrook, like other loop-type trails, it really depends on what
Where you
route
start.
someone's taking.
Yeah.
So we almost had to impose a geometry to the site and measure sort of a geometrical space, and then leave it to the walker or rider to add it up. So maybe that's something we could do in another way, but we'll take a look at that. I'm not really sure what the objective is, or I guess certainly knowing how far you've gone is important, but I don't know, those seem to be important at the early years.
Right.
Establishing the trail.
Yeah.
Most of our regular walkers either know it or don't care.
Or they're wearing a
I do.
device.
So-
Yeah, using their
Just while
smartphones.
we're at it, we've had
But-
long discussions at the KRT planning on how to show mileage and locations. One approach could be use the old rail method of just, you're at whatever point. Does that transfer to the walking public or riding? Obviously, it might not, so picking points, and then if you expand it, how do you respect whatever system you've created? So you'd almost have to come up with a universal system. So I think it's inherent in trail mileage, unless you literally have a straight line trail where you could, start out. But we'll take a look at it and see.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some new techniques others are using that's a better approach altogether. So including apps for, phones and things like that that might do more for us.
Any other commissioner comments or questions? Hearing none, I believe we have exhausted our agenda, so I will declare us adjourned.